Welcome, everyone. This is Jamie Flinchball, host of People Solve Problems, and we have a special guest with us, Laudy Allan. Laudy, how you doing?
I'm great, Jamie. How are you this morning?
I am fantastic. Always good to talk with you. Little introduction. Laudy is the Senior Vice President for Global Operations at Crayola, a company everyone knows, covering manufacturing, logistics, engineering, facilities. Um, has a reputation for tenacity and collaboration, which are two traits that are fundamental in problem solving and strategic thinking and operational performance and a whole bunch of other things. Um, so we're going to jump right into that, and collaboration is one of these things that's key to problem solving, key to working across organizational boundaries. How do you think about collaboration, involvement of others, engagement of others as you deal with problem solving?
With any sort of problem solving, especially the past kind of almost 19 years at Crayola, I approach it in kind of four different ways, right? I first ensure that the people closest to the problem are involved and they're involved early. Um, I like to have, if when we're kind of doing a problem solving, majority of the time should be about clarifying the problem and what we're kind of trying to achieve. So making it super clear on what problem we're trying to solve and using data to kind of back that up. And the fundamental thing is why it matters. Because a lot of times we approach from a problem solving, in fact, we just want to kind of go and solve the problem without understanding why it actually matters and what impact it has on the business. As I stated earlier, involving those right voices early is crucial because it allows those voices to be heard early and it allows for accountability when we're getting into the solution, right? And it also kind of helps build that environment that we're open to talking about problems, but we're also open and excited to solve them. And then I ensure that we use some sort of structured problem solving. Now, it could be any sort of tool, right? An A3 or a Six Sigma or anything like that. But the whole purpose of ensuring that it's a structured problem solving and people are going through the process, it's because it allows that collaboration to start opening up. It allows people to start talking to each other and learning in each kind of area and the process. And it allows it to be a little bit focused. And it allows people to start looking at it from a fact-based and data and opening up those lines of communication. And then more kind of less being abstract, right? Or circular, but more like kind of focused. And then I think it's super clear, even from a collaboration perspective. So when I talk about collaboration in problem solving, collaboration allows for the input, right? It allows for the collaboration to kind of solve also the problem. But I make sure that there's clarity on who the decision maker is and who is clear on who's executing it, because that then allows the accountability to be driven through the problem solving. So that's what I kind of like approach problem solving from a collaborative approach.
Yeah, I love that. Those are great ingredients, if you will. And I want to pick apart a little bit of this. Getting those closest to the problem involved early. Uh, if you make that a priority, it doesn't always come with those are the people with the problem solving skills. Those are the people with broader context. Those are the people with time available to go solve the problem. So is that idea of involving those closest early a sort of fundamental practice, regardless of the consequences? And then do you see those other barriers in involving them? Are they opportunities for learning and development, or are they simply friction points in trying to move forward with the problem?
Sometimes even on the manufacturing floor from a problem solving, right? The best operators might not be the ones that are keen to kind of open for problem solving or kind of get into they might just jump to solution right away. So you got to kind of have it as a balance. So when I say about having the voices early, it's multiple voices. It's not just kind of one type of operator that I like to be part of the problem solving approach, right? So when that situation happens, when you want a key operator, however, they're not really understanding the process or they're not really used to kind of using any sort of tools, it serves as a learning opportunity for them. So I like kind of having multiple types of diversity of thought into the approach on the problem solving. So I like to kind of mix it with somebody who's driven and who you see them naturally going through the process of the problem solving, like trying to understand, super curious. And I like to balance that with ones that are so indebted, like in the process so much that they're the experts in the process. And I like to kind of fuel that because that's where kind of the really good debates and challenges and questions and asks start happening when we balance different types of folks in the problem solving approach.
Yeah, love that approach. I'm a big fan of cognitive diversity and fundamentally, I always like to say problem solving isn't a skill, it's a collection of skills. And so whether it's different perspectives, personalities, or skills, you bring them all together, and it starts to balance out, and people get to learn along the way. You mentioned data and the importance of using data. Data has always been important for problem solving, whether it's numerical data or simply facts and observable conditions. I think, well, I don't want to open up a can of worms around AI. AI has almost brought data back into the limelight as, how do I make this AI program work if I don't have data to feed it? Do you approach data and the needs of that? We don't always have the data. We don't always have the cleanliness of data, the depth of data. Do you work on data availability and data hygiene proactively, saying we don't even know how we're going to use it, we just want to have it? Do you get into problem solving, find you don't have the data, then go start finding a way to get it? How do you deal with that imperfect data world in problem solving?
All of the above, right, Jamie? So it's interesting, even my world, right? There's in manufacturing logistics, the data is there, right? There's clear measurable metrics that we are measured against. We track daily. We have a system to kind of identify the gaps. We have a system that approaches problem solving in a focused way. And then my other part of my world is on this like global new product development. So I see on the flip side that the data might not be there. And also the problems aren't really defined well. They know that there's a problem, but they don't necessarily have the data to prove it, right? It's very fuzzy, especially the front end of when we're kind of trying to like take an insight and make a product out of it. So how I approach that and what I've learned throughout my journey of trying to put systems and processes in the global new product development, I started with what the process is. And I started with trying to measure what is healthy in this process. What is the output that we expect from this process? And throughout the process, as we go through it, what's a healthy process that ensures the healthiness of the result? So I approached it that way. When I don't necessarily have the data or we don't know the data, we don't really know what problem we're trying to solve. Then I approached it as, hey, let's start measuring it, how measuring it we are. And when we're talking about things that don't necessarily have data, and I talked about the process of the global new product development, I made sure that it wasn't like 17 things that we're measuring. Let's just start with 3 to 5 things. 3 to 5 things. We'll start with that. We'll start measuring it. we'll start seeing if that's really the key to what we ended up with that we want. So it's a long journey, especially with that approach and folks that are in the creative realm trying to kind of grasp more of a process focused approach. And when I started this journey, having this process health visible and working through it, that's why I really wanted kind of a little bit of data that we are actually measuring. And then we could kind of build upon that. And then they start really understanding, oh, wow, maybe we should start measuring this data. Maybe we should start measuring this, and then getting to it. And getting to it in something like a global new product development is very interesting because we're learning now, hey, how can we use AI and automation to get data that we necessarily had to we don't own that data. It's out in the world somewhere. How can we get it? How can we mesh it together? How can it be in a way that is structured and we're able to read it and analyze it and make decisions?
Yeah, I love the framing of basically the data drives curiosity, and that curiosity can drive more data. As opposed to, we often start collecting data around accountability, and I'm certainly not against accountability, but using it to be curious, learning it, using it for the learning, and then that just leads to other questions, is tremendously powerful. Let me then, the last part of that beginning, that very first question was around structured problem solving. So I want to go back to that a little bit. As you think about structured problem solving, just in using those words, you mentioned, Six Sigma and A3s. Do you try to pick the right tool for the problem? Do you kind of not care what tool it is as long as it's structured? How do you think about structured problem solving, and what are you asking your teams to think about in those words?
I really don't care about the tool. I just care about the thought process and the mindset. So because most of the tools are very similar in nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to identify and clarify an issue, have data that supports that, focus on it in a way that the bigger problem, a little piece of the problem, how can I kind of fix that part? And there's a cycle. As long as that is happening, I'm not married to a tool because I really think this tools just force the mindset. It allows us to follow the mindset process, and it allows us that it opens up things in our brain and our hearts and our souls on like, oh, wow, like the tool should just help accelerate that. So I'm not really married to a specific tool. I think A3s are pretty simple to use, and it's like from an operations perspective, especially folks on the manufacturing floor, it's not intimidating. It's very intuitive. So it's easier to use A3s on the manufacturing floor instead of something like a Six Sigma because it's easy to grasp for people that are not necessarily are very familiar with tools.
Yeah, so that whole idea that the mindset is really what you're after, and the behavior and how they approach it, that the structure just helps guide that. Do you try to get the mindset right before they use the tool? Do you hope the tool drives the mindset, or do you just kind of throw them all in the deep end and see what happens and then fix it as it goes?
So I think not everybody has the mindset. So the tool has to allow us kind of the learning opportunity to learn the mindset. So it kind of forces us to really clearly define the problem, clearly define the gap, clearly define what we're kind of really targeting, trying to go through the process, going in, seeing the process. It allows that process to happen because we are forced to use the tool. So those that aren't very familiar or know of it's not natural to them, this tool allows it. So I think it needs to happen first before the learning happens. So once you kind of go through it, then it starts really clicking. And I mean, even personally, right? I I was always a curious person. I was always like wanting to improve things. That's just something in my nature. However, I didn't necessarily know that any sort of problem solving and how I approached it, I should really clearly define the problem. I had to go through it. And then I started really learning. And then it became just natural. When any time a problem happens, I immediately say, well, what problem are we trying to solve? Can you help define that? Is it a really big problem? Is it a small problem? And how is it impacting the business? So to me, the tool starts first, then the mindset comes because you're naturally going to get there.
Yeah, I like that answer, and it's sort of helps people understand it's a non-linear, non-straightforward learning process, and you kind of just have to jump into it, and the you have to be open to the learning, but the learning comes by doing and engaging with the problem solving itself. So all of what we talked about so far is really about, once you've decided to start problem solving. I want to kind of come back to before that, which is, when do you even start to do problem solving, especially in your world of operations? I mean, since we've been talking, surely a new problem has come up that you don't even know about, right? So it's just the world of operations. There's always new problems. You have your metrics, you have what you can see on the floor, you have many, many things to deal with. How do you sort of see the whole problem landscape, and how do you prioritize the endless array of problems that you and your team can go work on?
Okay, that's like a great question because I'm in the midst of it, right? And for manufacturing and logistics, how we approach it from a priority perspective, right? What problems are we trying to solve first? We clearly have standards, we clearly have metrics, and we measure ourselves based on those metrics every single day. If it's on service, if it's on safety, quality, what it cost, we clearly measure it, and we have a system and visuals that are in place to clearly define it and how we are for succeeding or failing. And then we have what the recipe is that we know in the process will help hit those metrics, right? So we measure that. And then is the opportunities come when we're huddling and discussing. And if it's on a level 1 board or a level 2 or level 3, we clearly have that throughout the operations organizations. And those sorts of opportunities get bubbled up, and then they get bubbled up. So then we have an array of 300 opportunities that we really want to solve. So how we kind of approach problem solving, and we're kind of going through the journey now, right? On, hey, what we kind of worked on last year from a priority perspective, the process didn't really work. It didn't yield what we wanted to from a problem solving perspective. How can we have a better process? So what we're kind of doing, anything from a customer perspective, a risk or a safety, clearly goes on top. Clearly goes on top. Get it fixed. If it's a just do it, if it's a structured problem solving, those are high priorities always. Then we kind of define the impact, and we base it on certain criteria, and we don't make it complicated. We have 2 to 3 criteria, and we base it on impact, and we kind of say, okay, how complex? And then we kind of prioritize it in a huddle, and then we kind of apply resources to it. Now, what I ensure that the team does, I don't want 10 to 30 problem solving opportunities happening, because I am a big proponent of focus and follow through. I don't think having 30 problem solving opportunities, we will end up doing none. So let's just focus our efforts on 3 to 5. Get those going with the biggest impact to our operations, and then follow through, fix some, then go back to the board. What else is up? And kind of continuously improving one by one. And new things pop up and things will go down the priority. So that's how we're kind of approaching just the prioritization of problems. Now, on the flip side, in the global new product development world that I also live in, it's interesting because we didn't have any sort of problems. We're kind of like, guys, we know there's problems. But nobody knew how to kind of define the opportunity. Once we put that process help together now and allowing people to voice their concerns and what opportunities we want to go after, we're starting to see all these sorts of opportunities. And now we have to have like a prioritization process just to kind of help with that, which is fantastic.
Mhm.
So that's kind of how we approach kind of prioritizing the opportunities and how we go about solving them.
Yeah, I love that. And if of course we want we want to be aware of more problems than we have capacity to solve, and that allows us to prioritize, but also requires us to prioritize. We like to say no problem is a problem, which means if we all sitting there feeling like we know something's wrong, but we don't know how to articulate it.
Yeah.
That's never a good place to be in. Just as we sort of wrap up, you've held a lot of different roles. You've had a lot of different pieces of breadth and touched a bunch of different parts of the organization. What's been the hardest adjustment for you as you've sort of moved up through the ranks to your current role as Senior Vice President of Global Operations? What's been the hardest adjustment?
I think it's coaching instead of doing. That is the biggest adjustment for me because I'm somebody, even as you mentioned, like tenacity, like bias for action, going and getting, and sometimes I have to learn to step back and wait and see and approach problem solving from a coaching perspective instead of kind of going and doing it. And that has been, I think, the most rewarding too. It's most difficult part I've learned, but it's also the most rewarding because you start seeing people just open up
Hmm.
and things come out so much differently and you see somebody's growth throughout. So that has been actually the biggest adjustment for me is stepping back and allowing not to be involved so much, but kind of sitting in the audience a bit and
Yep.
coaching from afar. So, but that's how we build a learning environment. That's how we like, that's the environment I want to build here. Our culture, we want to learning. We want to test and learn. We want people excited about problems and opportunities and not hiding from them and challenging people. So I have to do that in order for that environment to flourish.
Yep. And I liked how you said how it's more rewarding. It's, I think, important to recognize for people that, the reward feeling of solving a problem is immediate, but the reward of seeing other people solve it takes time. And we have to be a little patient, which is not always easy, especially for those that are tenacious. Well, I thank you for sharing your experience, your perspective, your leadership, and I wish you and the entire Crayola team all the very best.
Thank you, Jamie. Appreciate you.